The 12th resignation letter hit the trash can. Aiden Black stared out the window, drumming his fingers on the desk. 2 weeks ago, his last assistant had run out crying, and no one had applied since. The HR manager spoke in a trembling voice. "There are no more applicants." That's when the door opened. A woman walked in. Coffee was dripping from the paper cup in her hand, and breadcrumbs were falling from her bag. She looked at Aiden and smiled brightly. "Hello. I'm Riley Monroe." Aiden's eyes turned ice-cold. All 12 previous assistants had started with that same smile. 3 days later, they all quit in tears. He checked his watch. "You're 5 minutes late." Instead of apologizing, Riley tilted her head. "Have you had lunch? You get angry when you're hungry, right?" The HR manager held his breath. Aiden's face hardened like stone. In 27 years as CEO, no one had ever said anything like that to him. Riley pulled a scone from her bag. "Want to share? I made it myself. It's delicious." At that moment, Aiden was certain. This woman wouldn't last a day. Aiden threw the scone in the trash. After the interview, Riley left with a smile. The HR manager asked in a shaky voice if that meant she wasn't hired. Aiden didn't answer. He thought that woman wouldn't last a day. The next day at 8 a.m., Riley was standing in front of the office. She was holding cleaning supplies and a fresh scone. The security guard panicked and called Aiden. A woman who hadn't received a hiring notice had come to work. When Aiden got off the elevator, Riley was already inside his office. 2 weeks' worth of documents were piled like mountains on his desk, and 12 crumpled resignation letters were stuffed in the trash can. Employees whispered in the hallway. That woman would also quit crying within 3 days. Riley turned over the trash can under their stares. The resignation letters scattered across the floor. She began examining them one by one. The first resignation letter said, "Unbearable." The second said, "Personal humiliation." From the third one onwards, the writing was smeared. They were tear stains. Riley arranged all the resignation letters on the desk, like a detective investigating a crime scene. She wrote dates next to each resignation letter. When Aiden entered the office, she was tapping on a calculator. "What are you doing?" Riley looked up. There was a strange light in her eyes. "I'm calculating the average time it took you to make 12 people cry. It's 2.3 days. Aiden's jaw tightened. Riley smiled and put the resignation letters in the drawer. "My goal is 2.4 days. At that moment, Aiden realized. This woman was not ordinary, and she had some kind of plan. Riley slammed a latte down on Aiden's desk. 9 a.m. It was when Aiden had requested the Monday report. Instead of files, Riley brought coffee with heart-shaped latte art. Aiden's hands stopped. In 27 years as CEO, Monday had always started with reports. Riley sat down in a chair and began drinking her own coffee. "Where's the report?" Riley took a sip of coffee and answered. "I haven't made it yet. Drink this instead." Aiden's voice turned cold. The past 12 assistants had started this way and all quit in tears. Riley watched Aiden get angry and nodded, like a scientist confirming experimental results. Aiden pushed the latte away. Coffee spilled across the desk. Riley wiped it up with tissues, muttering that it was faster than expected. "What did you say?" Riley threw the wet tissue in the trash and stood up. A strange determination appeared in her eyes. "I'll try Americano tomorrow." At that moment, Aiden was certain. This woman was crazy. Riley stuck a post-it note on Aiden's office door. It read, "CEO's Laughter Challenge, Day 1. When Aiden entered the office, Riley was placing a rubber duck on his desk. Aiden's face hardened like stone. No toys had entered his office in the past 3 years. Riley squeezed the rubber duck, making it squeak. Employees in the hallway craned their necks to watch. Someone started secretly filming with their phone. Aiden grabbed the rubber duck and threw it in the trash. Riley pulled out 5 more identical rubber ducks from her bag. like an infinite magazine. What is this? Riley arranged the rubber ducks on the desk one by one as she answered. It's for your stress relief, sir. They squeak when you press them. Aiden's voice became ice cold. None of the past 12 assistants had ever done anything like this. Riley began writing Aiden's reaction in her notebook. Day 1. Rubber duck failed. Next, we'll try balloons. At that moment, Aiden realized. This woman was systematically experimenting on him. Linda Baxter grabbed Riley's arm and dragged her away. Aiden's aunt and company chairman suddenly appeared and took Riley to the chairman's office. Employees in the hallway held their breath. It had been 10 years since Chairman Linda had personally taken someone away. The chairman's office door slammed shut. Linda sat across from Riley and burst into laughter. The 60-year-old woman giggled like she was in her 20s. Riley stepped back in confusion. The rubber duck operation was excellent. Linda pulled out an identical rubber duck from her desk drawer. Riley's eyes widened. Linda pressed the rubber duck, making it squeak. No one has been able to make that boy laugh for 27 years. Riley tried to speak, but Linda raised her hand to stop her. A strange anticipation appeared in her eyes. I know why you're special. But... Linda pushed a file across the desk toward Riley. The cover of the file was marked, Confidential. You can't give up until you see this. At that moment, Riley realized. She hadn't come for a simple assistant interview. Riley ripped the birthday calendar off the wall. She tore it into pieces and scattered them across the break room floor. Every employee's birthday, anniversary, and personal milestone was written in her handwriting. 3 weeks of careful observation, destroyed in seconds. The cleaning lady found her there at midnight, sitting among the paper scraps. Riley had memorized everyone's information without the calendar anyway. She knew Marcus from accounting had a diabetic daughter. She knew Sarah from marketing was getting divorced. She knew the security guard's mother was in chemotherapy. The next morning, Riley walked into the office carrying 12 cupcakes. She placed one on each desk without saying a word. Marcus stared at his sugar-free chocolate cupcake. Sarah found a note attached to hers that read simply, "You're stronger than you know." The security guard's cupcake had a small pink ribbon, the color for breast cancer awareness. Employees gathered in clusters, whispering. How did the new assistant know these details? Riley had been there less than a week. Aiden arrived at 9 a.m. sharp to find his entire staff smiling. For the first time in months, the office buzzed with warmth instead of fear. He watched through his glass wall as Riley distributed coffee, remembered names, asked about families. His jaw tightened. This wasn't what assistants were supposed to do. Riley knocked on his door carrying his usual black coffee and a stack of perfectly organized files. She set them down without the usual cheerful commentary. Aiden glanced up from his computer screen. The reports are early today. Riley nodded and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Aiden's voice caught her. The cupcakes were adequate. Riley's hand froze on the doorknob. She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the comment. Aiden immediately regretted speaking. He hadn't given a compliment in 3 years. The words felt foreign in his mouth. Riley walked out, closing the door softly behind her. She never heard him. Aiden stared at the closed door for 5 full minutes. His coffee grew cold as he replayed his words. Adequate. The first positive thing he'd said to an employee since becoming CEO, and it was pathetic. He opened his laptop and found his schedule perfectly updated. Every meeting time, location, and required documents were color-coded and cross-referenced. His lunch preferences were noted. His coffee temperature was specified down to the degree. Riley had studied him like a science project. She knew he preferred his pens arranged by color. She knew he checked his phone exactly every 12 minutes. She knew he ate the same salad for lunch because he hated making decisions about food. Aiden scrolled through the schedule, finding details he'd never told anyone. His doctor's appointment was marked, Confidential, Back Issues. His monthly call with his therapist was labeled simply, Personal Time. How did she know? The intercom buzzed. Riley's voice came through, professional and distant. "Mr. Black, the Peterson Industries representatives are here. Conference room A is prepared with the documents you requested, plus the supplementary research you didn't know you needed." Aiden pressed the intercom button. "I didn't request supplementary research." "I know. But you'll want it when you see Peterson's latest quarterly reports. They're struggling more than they're admitting." The line went dead. Aiden sat back in his chair, unsettled. His previous assistants had followed orders. Riley was anticipating his needs before he knew them himself. The Peterson meeting lasted 2 hours. Riley's research saved him from a disastrous partnership. The supplementary documents revealed Peterson Industries was hemorrhaging money and desperate for a buyout. What should have been a collaboration became a hostile takeover. Aiden made $17 million because of Riley's preparation. When he returned to his office, she was gone for the day. A note sat on his desk: "Tomorrow's meetings are rescheduled. The Johnson contract needs your signature by noon. Your dry cleaning will be delivered at 3 p.m. At the bottom, in smaller text, "You said the cupcakes were adequate." "I heard you." Aiden crumpled the note, then smoothed it out again. She had heard him. She'd been listening when he thought she wasn't. The next morning brought chaos. Riley arrived to find Aiden screaming at a client over the phone. The Hartwell Corporation deal was falling apart. Their CEO was threatening to walk away from a $50 million contract over what he called communication issues. Aiden slammed the phone down and turned to Riley. "Get Hartwell back on the line. Fix this." Riley picked up the phone and dialed. When CEO Margaret Hartwell answered, Riley's voice transformed. Gone was the cheerful assistant. In its place was someone warm, understanding, human. She told Hartwell about Aiden's childhood, growing up in foster care, never learning how to express gratitude or kindness. She explained that his coldness wasn't personal. It was armor. She promised that behind the ice was someone who truly valued partnerships and would honor every commitment. Aiden watched in horror as Riley revealed his most private details to a virtual stranger. His hands shook with rage. No one was supposed to know about his past. No one was supposed to see behind the mask he'd built. Hartwell's voice softened through the speakerphone. She agreed to reconsider the deal, but only if she could work directly with Riley instead of Aiden. Riley hung up and turned to face him. Aiden's face was white with fury. "How dare you?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. Riley stood perfectly still, waiting for the explosion she knew was coming. "How dare you discuss my private life with clients? How dare you make promises on my behalf? How dare you think you understand anything about me?" Aiden's voice rose with each word until he was shouting. The glass walls of his office did nothing to contain the sound. Every employee in the building could hear him destroying Riley just like he'd destroyed the previous 12 assistants. "You are nothing. You are a secretary who thinks she's important because she can remember birthdays and make coffee. You are replaceable, forgettable, worthless." Riley didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out a resignation letter, and placed it on his desk. The paper was already written, dated, signed. She'd been carrying it since her first day. "I'll clean out my desk." Riley walked to the door, her spine straight, her head high. She turned the handle and paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Black, I never thought you were worthless. I thought you were scared." The door closed with a soft click. Aiden stared at the resignation letter, his hands trembling. Around him, the office had gone completely silent. Through his glass walls, he could see employees staring at him in shock and disgust. He had just done it again. Driven away the one person who had actually made his life better. But this time felt different. This time, he wasn't sure he could live with what he'd done. Riley tore her resignation letter in half. The pieces fluttered to the floor like confetti celebrating her defiance. The next morning, she walked into Aiden's office carrying 2 cups of coffee and a box of donuts. She set them on his desk as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't screamed at her. as if he hadn't called her worthless. Aiden stared at her in disbelief. His throat was still raw from yesterday's shouting. The entire office had watched him destroy her, and now she was back, smiling like it was just another Tuesday. She arranged the donuts in a perfect circle around his coffee cup. Glazed, chocolate, sprinkles, a rainbow of sugar and defiance. "I have regrets," she said simply. Aiden's pen stopped moving. Riley pulled out a chair and sat down across from his desk without being invited. Her eyes were clear, determined. "I regret not bringing donuts yesterday. Angry people make better decisions when their blood sugar is stable." She bit into a chocolate donut, crumbs falling onto his pristine reports. Aiden watched, paralyzed. In 27 years, no one had ever returned after he'd fired them. No one had ever sat in his office eating breakfast like they owned the place. Riley licked chocolate off her fingers and pulled out her phone. She showed him the screen, a recording app, red dot blinking. "I recorded yesterday's conversation. Would you like to hear how you sound when you're having a tantrum?" The blood drained from Aiden's face. Riley pressed play. His voice filled the room, distorted by rage, calling her worthless, replaceable, nothing. The words hung in the air between them like poison. Riley stopped the recording and put her phone away. "I'm not quitting, but I am changing the rules." 3 hours later, Riley stood before the Yamamoto Industries board, presenting Aiden's quarterly projections. She'd never given a presentation before, but she spoke with the confidence of someone who'd been preparing her entire life. The Japanese executives leaned forward as she explained the market analysis in flawless Japanese. She'd learned the language in college, a detail buried in her resume that no one had bothered to read. Aiden watched from the back of the conference room, his jaw clenched. Riley was supposed to be taking notes, not leading the meeting. But the Yamamoto team was nodding, smiling, asking follow-up questions in rapid Japanese that she answered without hesitation. She closed the presentation with a bow that was exactly the right depth for the situation. The lead executive stood and applauded. In Japanese business culture, this was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Riley had just secured a $40 million partnership that Aiden had been chasing for 6 months. The Yamamoto team left, bowing and exchanging business cards with Riley. They barely acknowledged Aiden's presence. As the conference room emptied, Riley began packing up her materials. "Where did you learn Japanese?" Aiden's voice was barely audible. Riley looked up from her laptop. "College. Minor in East Asian Studies. It's on my resume, page 2. She zipped up her bag and headed for the door. Aiden's hand shot out, catching her wrist. The contact sent electricity through both of them. Riley looked down at his fingers wrapped around her arm, then back up at his face. Aiden released her immediately, his hand trembling. Riley walked out, leaving him alone with the lingering scent of her perfume and the weight of what she'd just accomplished. That night, Aiden couldn't sleep. He wandered his penthouse apartment, replaying the day's events. Riley's presentation had been flawless. Her Japanese had been better than his own translators. She'd secured a deal he'd been struggling with for months, and she'd done it without breaking a sweat. He found himself at his home office, staring at Riley's personnel file. The sanitized version HR had given him during the hiring process. But something nagged at him. Details that didn't add up. Gaps in her employment history. References that seemed too perfect. The next morning, Aiden's schedule had been completely reorganized. Meetings moved, appointments rescheduled, lunch plans changed. Riley had restructured his entire day without asking permission. But somehow, everything flowed better. Clients were happier. Meetings ended on time. His stress levels dropped for the first time in years. She'd turned his chaotic life into a symphony of efficiency. Aiden found her in the break room, teaching the accounting department origami during their lunch break. Paper cranes covered the table, each one folded with mathematical precision. The accountants, normally the most serious people in the building, were laughing and competing to see who could make the smallest crane. Riley looked up as he approached, her hands still folding paper. "The Peterson contract is on your desk. Signed and notarized. They agreed to all our terms." Aiden had been negotiating with Peterson Industries for 3 weeks. They'd been demanding concessions he wasn't willing to make. Somehow, Riley had convinced them to accept his original offer. He picked up one of her paper cranes, marveling at its delicate construction. The accountants watched nervously, waiting for him to criticize their impromptu art class. Instead, Aiden carefully placed the crane in his shirt pocket. That evening, Aiden found himself working late again. The building was empty except for security and cleaning crews. He was reviewing quarterly reports when he noticed a light still on in the conference room. Through the glass walls, he could see Riley hunched over a laptop, surrounded by stacks of documents. She'd been there for hours, working on something that wasn't part of her official duties. Aiden approached the conference room quietly. Riley's notebook was open beside her laptop, filled with her neat handwriting. He could see fragments of her notes, employee satisfaction surveys, retention statistics, productivity metrics. She was analyzing the company's personnel data, looking for patterns that might explain their high turnover rate. She was trying to fix problems she hadn't created, solving issues that weren't her responsibility. Riley looked up and saw him watching through the glass. Instead of closing her laptop or hiding her work, she gestured for him to come in. "The employee satisfaction scores are terrible," she said without preamble. "Especially in middle management. People aren't quitting because of the work. They're quitting because of the culture." She turned her laptop screen toward him. Spreadsheets full of data, charts showing declining morale, graphs tracking the correlation between management style and employee retention. She'd been working on this analysis for weeks, using her free time to diagnose the company's deeper problems. "Why?" Aiden asked. Riley looked at him with those clear, honest eyes that seemed to see straight through his defenses. "Because I want this place to be somewhere people are excited to work. Including you." That evening, Aiden found himself riding the elevator to the parking garage later than usual. The building was empty except for security and the cleaning crew. The elevator stopped on the 15th floor, and Riley stepped in. They stood in silence as the floors ticked by. 14, 13, 12. The tension was suffocating. Riley stared straight ahead at the elevator doors. Aiden stared at her reflection in the polished steel. At the 7th floor, the elevator shuddered and stopped. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. Riley pulled out her phone and dialed building maintenance. No answer. Aiden tried the emergency button. Nothing. "Looks like we're stuck," Riley said, settling onto the floor with her back against the wall. Aiden remained standing, his hands pressed against the doors as if he could force them open through sheer will. His breathing was shallow, rapid. Riley watched him with growing concern. "Are you claustrophobic?" Aiden's only response was the sound of his palms slapping against the metal doors. His shirt was soaking with sweat despite the cool air conditioning. Riley stood and moved toward him. "Aiden." It was the first time she'd used his first name. The sound of it stopped his frantic pounding. He turned to face her, his eyes wide with something that looked like panic. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. When he didn't, she placed her hand flat against his chest. His heart was racing like a trapped bird. "In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Aiden followed her breathing pattern, his eyes locked on hers. Gradually, his heartbeat slowed. The panic receded. But neither of them moved away. They stood there in the red emergency lighting, her hand on his chest, his eyes searching her face for something he couldn't name. The elevator was silent except for their synchronized breathing. "Riley," he whispered. It was the first time he'd said her name like it mattered. Like she mattered. The elevator lurched back to life, fluorescent lights blazing. Riley stepped back, breaking the spell. The doors opened on the parking garage, and she walked out without looking back. Aiden remained in the elevator until the doors closed again, his chest burning where her hand had been. The next morning brought chaos that even Riley couldn't have predicted. Someone had leaked her background to the office gossip network. By 9 a.m., everyone knew that Riley Monroe had graduated summa cum laude from Wharton Business School. She'd been a senior accountant at Morrison & Associates before mysteriously disappearing from the corporate world 2 years ago. The whispers followed her through the hallways. Why was someone with her credentials working as an assistant? What was she hiding? Aiden found part of the answer in an email that had somehow appeared in his inbox overnight. A background check he'd never requested, containing information that made his blood run cold. Riley Monroe, age 27. Father, David Monroe, deceased. Former VP of Operations at Black Industries. Terminated during company restructuring 7 years ago. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, stress-related. Riley had been working for the company that killed her father. And she'd never said a word. Riley walked into the conference room carrying a bright yellow umbrella. The quarterly budget meeting was in full swing, with department heads arguing over resource allocation and cost-cutting measures. The atmosphere was tense, voices raised, tempers fraying. Riley set the umbrella in the corner and took her seat at the far end of the table. For 20 minutes, she said nothing. Just watched as grown professionals bickered like children over spreadsheet cells and pie charts. Then it started raining. Not outside, inside the conference room. Riley had somehow rigged the sprinkler system to activate on command. Water cascaded from the ceiling, soaking everyone at the table. Executives scrambled for cover, laptops slammed shut, papers scattered. In the chaos, Riley calmly opened her yellow umbrella and continued taking notes as if nothing unusual was happening. "What the hell is going on?" shouted the CFO, water dripping from his expensive suit. Riley looked up from her notepad, the picture of innocence under her umbrella. "Oh, this. It's a team-building exercise. I read that shared adversity brings people together." She reached under the table and turned off the sprinkler system. The room fell silent except for the sound of water dripping onto the conference table. 15 soaked executives stared at her in shock. Then someone started laughing. The head of marketing, a stern woman who never smiled, was giggling uncontrollably. Soon the entire room was laughing, the tension of the morning forgotten in the absurdity of the moment. "Now," Riley said, folding her umbrella, "shall we try this meeting again? With slightly less hostility this time." The budget was approved unanimously within an hour. Compromises were made, solutions found, problems solved. All because Riley had literally rained on their parade. Aiden watched from the doorway, marveling at her ability to transform conflict into cooperation with nothing but creativity and a sprinkler system. That afternoon, Aiden did something he'd never done before. He apologized. Not the corporate non-apology he'd perfected over the years, but a real, genuine admission of fault. He found Riley in the supply closet, reorganizing the office supplies with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. "I was wrong yesterday," he said without preamble. Riley looked up from a box of paperclips, her expression neutral. "You're wrong about a lot of things. You'll need to be more specific." Aiden stepped into the small closet, pulling the door closed behind him. The space was cramped, forcing them to stand closer than either was comfortable with. "I was wrong to shout at you. Wrong to question your methods. Wrong to assume I knew better." Riley set down the paperclips and faced him fully. In the confined space, he could smell her shampoo, see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. And I'm sorry. Genuinely, completely sorry." It was the first sincere apology Aiden had given in 7 years. The words felt rusty in his mouth, but also somehow liberating. Riley studied his face, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. Finding none, she nodded. "Apology accepted. Now, was there something else you needed, or did you just come here to confess in a closet like some kind of corporate priest?" Despite everything, Aiden smiled. A real smile, not the calculated expression he wore in meetings. Riley's eyes widened slightly at the transformation. She'd never seen him look genuinely happy before. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Ask away." "Why do you stay? After everything I've put you through, why are you still here?" Riley was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. When she spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "Because I see who you could be. Under all the anger and fear and control, There's someone worth saving. Someone who used to care about more than just profit margins and power. She reached past him to grab a box of pens from the top shelf. The movement brought them even closer together, and Aiden caught himself holding his breath. Besides, she added, stepping back, someone has to keep you from destroying everything you've built. Over the following days, Aiden found himself watching Riley constantly. Not in the creepy, obsessive way he'd monitored his previous assistants, but with genuine fascination. She moved through the office like a conductor leading an orchestra, bringing out the best in everyone around her. She remembered birthdays, celebrated small victories, offered comfort during difficult times. She turned a corporate environment into something that felt almost like a family. And somehow, impossibly, she was including him in that family. She brought him coffee without being asked. She reorganized his schedule to include lunch breaks he'd been skipping for months. She left small notes on his desk, reminders about meetings, updates on projects, occasional jokes that made him smile despite himself. The transformation wasn't lost on the other employees. They began approaching Aiden differently, less like a terrifying dictator and more like a human being who might actually listen to their ideas. Productivity increased. Morale improved. The office felt lighter, brighter, more alive. But with the changes came new challenges. Riley's computer crashed on a Tuesday morning, taking with it 3 days of work on a crucial presentation. IT claimed it was a random system failure, but Aiden suspected sabotage. Someone didn't want Riley to succeed. He spent his lunch break in the IT department, using his authority to demand a full investigation. The tech who examined Riley's hard drive found evidence of deliberate tampering. Someone had planted a virus designed to corrupt her files. "Can you recover the data?" Aiden asked. The technician shook his head. "Sorry, sir. Whatever she was working on is gone." Aiden's jaw tightened. Someone in his company was actively working against Riley, trying to undermine her efforts and make her fail. He had his suspicions about who might be responsible, but he needed proof. That evening, he stayed late, reviewing security footage and access logs. What he found made his blood boil. The next morning, Riley arrived to find her presentation restored and waiting on her desk. Every slide, every chart, every carefully crafted sentence had been recreated from scratch. She looked up to find Aiden standing in his office doorway, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd been up all night. "How did you?" she began. "I have a good memory," he said simply. "And I pay attention when you talk." Riley stared at the presentation, then at him. No one had ever done something like this for her before. The gesture was so thoughtful, so personal, that it took her breath away. "Thank you," she whispered. Aiden nodded and disappeared back into his office, leaving Riley alone with the gift of his attention and the growing realization that her feelings for him were becoming dangerously complicated. The presentation was a success, securing a partnership with Henderson Global that would bring in $25 million over 3 years. Riley delivered it flawlessly, fielding questions with confidence and closing the deal with a handshake that felt like victory. As the Henderson team left, their CEO pulled Aiden aside. "That assistant of yours is remarkable. If you ever want to sell her contract, I'll pay whatever you're asking." Aiden's response was swift and sharp. "She's not for sale." The CEO laughed, thinking it was a negotiation tactic. "Everyone has a price, Black. Name yours." Aiden stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Touch her, poach her, or even think about making her an offer, and I'll destroy your company. Are we clear?" The CEO's smile faded as he realized Aiden wasn't joking. He nodded quickly and left, leaving Aiden alone with the shocking realization of how possessive he'd become. Not possessive of Riley as property, but protective of her as someone precious. That afternoon, Riley found a manila envelope on her desk with her name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single document that made her hands shake and her vision blur. It was a termination notice. Not hers, her father's. Dated 7 years ago. Signed by Aiden Black. The official reason given was restructuring and cost reduction. But handwritten notes in the margins told a different story. Her father had been asking questions about company finances, digging into discrepancies that someone wanted to keep buried. He'd been fired not for incompetence, but for getting too close to the truth. Riley stared at the document, her father's face swimming in her memory. David Monroe had been a good man, honest and hard-working. He'd loved his job, believed in the company, trusted his colleagues. That trust had killed him. She looked up through the glass walls of Aiden's office. He was on a conference call, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. He looked focused, passionate, alive. Nothing like the cold, calculating man who'd signed her father's death warrant. But appearances could be deceiving. Riley had learned that lesson the hard way. She folded the termination notice carefully and slipped it into her purse. Then she pulled out a piece of company letterhead and began to write. Not a resignation letter. She'd tried that approach before. This was something else entirely. A letter of explanation. A confession. A goodbye that wasn't really goodbye. By the time she finished writing, the office was empty except for security and cleaning crews. Riley sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on Aiden's desk. Then she gathered her personal belongings and walked out of Black Industries for what she thought might be the last time. The letter was waiting when Aiden arrived the next morning. 3 pages of Riley's careful handwriting, explaining everything. Her father's death, her mother's grief, her own anger and desire for revenge. How she'd planned to destroy him from the inside, to make him care about her and then break his heart the way he'd broken her family. But somewhere along the way, the plan had changed. She'd started to see him as human rather than monster. She'd begun to care about the company, about the employees, about him. The revenge she'd planned had turned into something else entirely: redemption. The letter ended with a simple statement: I can't love someone I'm supposed to hate. But I can't hate someone I'm learning to love. So I'm leaving before I have to choose. Aiden read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling with each pass. Riley was gone. The best thing that had ever happened to his company, to his life, had walked away because of something he'd done 7 years ago. Something he barely remembered, but that had destroyed her world. He picked up his phone to call her, then set it down again. What could he say? How do you apologize for killing someone's father? How do you ask forgiveness for ruining a family? The answer came from an unexpected source. Linda Baxter knocked on his office door, holding a thick folder and wearing an expression Aiden had never seen before. His aunt looked nervous, guilty, and strangely hopeful all at once. We need to talk, she said, closing the door behind her. Linda set the folder on his desk and sat down across from him. The folder was labeled Project Riley in her distinctive handwriting. I hired her, Linda said without preamble. Not HR, not the recruitment agency. Me. Aiden stared at his aunt, the woman who'd raised him after his parents died, who'd taught him everything about business and nothing about compassion. You knew who she was? I knew exactly who she was. David Monroe's daughter. The girl who'd lost everything because of our company's mistakes. Linda opened the folder, revealing photographs, background checks, psychological profiles. She'd been tracking Riley for years, waiting for the right moment to bring her into the fold. David Monroe was a good man, Linda continued. He didn't deserve what happened to him. Neither did his family. Then why did you fire him? Linda's face crumpled, years of guilt finally surfacing. Because I was a coward. Because I was more concerned with protecting the company's reputation than doing what was right. Because I let fear make my decisions instead of conscience. She pulled out another document, David Monroe's original report about the financial discrepancies he'd discovered. Embezzlement, fraud, cover-ups that went all the way to the board level. He'd been fired to keep him quiet, and the stress of unemployment and disgrace had killed him. I've spent 7 years trying to figure out how to make it right, Linda said. Hiring Riley was my attempt at redemption. I thought if she could see who you really are, if you could see who she really is, maybe something good could come from all this tragedy. Aiden looked at the folder, at the evidence of his aunt's elaborate scheme to bring Riley into their lives. It should have felt like manipulation, but instead it felt like hope. Where is she now? I don't know. But I have a feeling she hasn't gone far. That evening, Aiden found Riley in the company conference room. She was sitting in the dark, staring out at the city lights, her resignation letter on the table in front of her. Unsigned. "You came back," he said, not daring to turn on the lights. "I never left. I've been sitting here for 12 hours, trying to decide what to do." Aiden sat down across from her, the city lights casting shadows across both their faces. "I read your letter. I read my father's termination notice." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 7 years of secrets and pain settling between them. "I don't remember firing your father," Aiden said finally. "I signed so many termination notices that year, they all blurred together. But that's not an excuse. It's a confession." Riley looked at him across the dark conference table. "He talked about you, you know. Even after he was fired. He said you were brilliant but broken. That someone had taught you to see people as numbers instead of human beings. Linda told me about the embezzlement. About why he was really fired." Riley nodded. "I know. She told me too. Today. Along with a lot of other things I wish I'd known sooner. Such as..." Riley pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. Inside was a contract, a partnership agreement making her co-CEO of Black Industries. Equal power, equal responsibility, equal ownership. "She's been planning this since the day she hired me. The company needs new leadership, someone who can bridge the gap between profit and people. She thinks we can do it together." Aiden stared at the contract, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "What do you think?" Riley was quiet for a long time, considering. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "I think my father would want me to try. Not for revenge, but for redemption. His and yours and mine." She reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. "Partners." Aiden squeezed her hand, feeling something shift in his chest. Not the icy control he'd maintained for years, but something warmer. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "Partners." Outside the conference room windows, the city sparkled with possibility. Inside, two broken people began the slow work of building something beautiful from the wreckage of their past. Aiden stood before the board of directors and threw his prepared speech in the trash. 15 executives shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs as he walked to the center of the room without notes, without slides, without the armor of corporate formality he'd worn for 27 years. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. He told them about David Monroe. About a good man who discovered fraud and paid for his honesty with his life. About a daughter who'd infiltrated their company seeking revenge and found redemption instead. About 7 years of cowardice disguised as business decisions. Board members exchanged glances, whispered among themselves, shuffled papers nervously. Aiden ignored them all. He was speaking to Riley, who sat in the back corner taking notes as if this were just another meeting. As if her entire world wasn't being dissected in front of strangers. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Linda Baxter began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, until the sound filled the boardroom. One by one, the other directors joined her. Not the polite applause of corporate theater, but something real. Something that acknowledged the weight of truth finally spoken. Riley looked up from her notepad, and for the first time since he'd known her, there were tears in her eyes. The next morning, Riley presented Aiden with a single-page contract amendment. Her terms for staying at Black Industries were written in her neat handwriting, each condition more absurd than the last. Mandatory smile quotas for management. Joke-telling requirements during staff meetings. A company-wide policy requiring executives to say please and thank you. "You're serious about this?" Aiden asked, reading the list of demands. Riley nodded solemnly. "Dead serious. If I'm going to work here, I refuse to do it in a joyless environment. Happiness is a business strategy." She'd turned corporate restructuring into comedy, and somehow it was working. Aiden signed the amendment without hesitation, then watched as Riley posted copies throughout the building. By noon, the office buzzed with laughter as employees tried to meet their daily smile requirements. The transformation was immediate. Meetings that once dragged for hours now ended with shared jokes and genuine smiles. The break room became a gathering place where departments mingled instead of hiding from each other. Productivity soared as stress levels plummeted. And in the middle of it all was Aiden, learning to laugh at himself for the first time in decades. Riley had weaponized joy, and he was her willing victim. 3 weeks later, the entire staff gathered in the main conference room for what they thought was a routine quarterly meeting. Instead, they found Riley standing at the front with a microphone and a mischievous grin. She decorated the room with balloons and streamers, transforming the corporate space into something that looked more like a birthday party. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I present to you our CEO's first public laugh." A projector screen dropped from the ceiling, showing security footage from the previous week. There was Aiden in the elevator, doubled over with laughter at something Riley had whispered to him. The sound was muted, but his joy was unmistakable. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Employees who'd worked there for years had never seen their CEO display genuine emotion. Riley had captured proof that the Ice King could melt, and she'd turned it into a celebration. Aiden should have been mortified. Instead, he found himself laughing again, right there in front of everyone. The sound was rusty from disuse, but it was real. Riley had given him back something he'd forgotten he'd lost. The company bulletin board became Riley's canvas for organizational revolution. Each morning brought new announcements that looked nothing like traditional corporate communications. Hand-drawn cartoons illustrated policy changes. Haikus replaced mission statements. Employee achievements were celebrated with elaborate certificates featuring glitter and gold stars. The board of directors called it unprofessional. The employees called it magical. Productivity reached all-time highs as people actually looked forward to coming to work. Riley's masterpiece was a new organizational chart that replaced job titles with personality descriptions. Aiden was listed as Reformed Grump, Specialist in Serious Faces. The CFO became Numbers Wizard, Part-Time Dragon. Riley labeled herself Professional Troublemaker, Full-Time Optimist. It shouldn't have worked. By every business school principle, it was chaos. But somehow, Riley had created order through joy, efficiency through laughter, success through humanity. The dinner invitation appeared on Aiden's desk without explanation. Handwritten on Riley's personal stationery, it simply said, 8 p.m. Russo's. Come hungry. No corporate agenda, no business purpose, just an invitation that felt dangerously personal. Aiden arrived at the restaurant to find Riley already seated, wearing a dress instead of her usual business attire. She looked different outside the office, softer, more vulnerable, impossibly beautiful in the candlelight. They talked about everything except work. Her childhood dreams of becoming a teacher. His secret love of terrible romantic comedies. The books they'd read, the places they wanted to travel, the fears that kept them awake at night. "This isn't a date," Riley said as dessert arrived. "Of course not," Aiden agreed, his fingers brushing hers as they reached for the same spoon. "We're just two colleagues having dinner." Absolutely. Very professional. But the way she looked at him across the table was anything but professional. And when he walked her to her car, neither of them wanted the evening to end. Riley's birthday fell on a Tuesday, and she mentioned it to no one. But Aiden noticed everything about her now. The way she hummed when she was happy, the way she bit her lip when she was thinking, the way she'd circled the date on her calendar in red ink. He spent a week planning the surprise, enlisting Linda and half the office staff as co-conspirators. When Riley arrived at work on her birthday morning, she found her desk buried under flowers, cards, and gifts from every department in the company. But the real surprise was waiting in the conference room. Aiden had transformed the space into a recreation of her college graduation party, complete with her favorite cake from a bakery 3 states away and a playlist of songs from her senior year. "How did you know?" she asked, tears streaming down her face as she surveyed the perfect recreation of one of her happiest memories. Aiden stepped closer, his voice soft with emotion. "Because I pay attention to the things that matter to you." The kiss happened on the company rooftop at sunset, with the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. They'd gone up there to escape a particularly tedious board meeting, seeking fresh air and perspective. Instead, they found each other. Riley was leaning against the railing, wind whipping her hair across her face, when Aiden reached out to tuck a strand behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so intimate, that it took her breath away. "We shouldn't," she whispered, even as she leaned into his touch. "I know," he replied, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "This complicates everything." "I know." But knowing didn't stop them. When their lips met, it was with 7 years of grief and healing, months of tension and trust, weeks of friendship blooming into something deeper. The kiss tasted like forgiveness and felt like coming home. The new contracts arrived the following Monday, printed on the finest paper and bound in leather portfolios. 2 names at the top, Aiden Black and Riley Monroe, co-chief executive officers. Equal partners in every sense of the word. Riley stared at the documents, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Her name next to his. Her signature carrying the same weight as the man who'd once called her worthless. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Aiden took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They signed the contracts together, their pens moving in synchrony, their futures binding in ink and intention. That evening, Aiden invited Linda and Riley to his penthouse for dinner. It was the first time he'd entertained guests in his home, the first time he'd allowed anyone to see behind the carefully constructed walls of his private life. Over wine and pasta, he told them about his childhood. The foster homes, the loneliness, the way he'd learned to survive by never letting anyone close enough to hurt him. He spoke about the day he decided that emotions were weakness, that caring was dangerous, that isolation was safety. Linda cried as she listened, finally understanding the boy she'd tried so hard to reach. Riley held Aiden's hand under the table, offering silent support as he excavated decades of buried pain. "I don't want to be that person anymore," he said as the evening wound down. "I don't want to be afraid of feeling, of connecting, of loving." He looked directly at Riley as he spoke the last word, and she felt her heart skip a beat. The company party was Riley's idea, but it became something bigger than either of them had imagined. What started as a simple celebration of their partnership became a testament to transformation. Employees brought their families, their children, their dreams made manifest in a workplace that finally felt like home. Aiden stood at the podium, looking out at faces that were no longer afraid of him. He introduced Riley not as his assistant, not as his co-CEO, but as his partner in every sense that mattered. "She came here to destroy me," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "Instead, she saved me. She saved all of us." Riley joined him at the podium, their hands finding each other naturally. Together, they looked out at the company they'd rebuilt, the family they'd created, the future they'd chosen. She was never just an assistant. She was the woman who'd taught a frozen heart to beat again. She was the partner who'd shown him that strength came not from standing alone, but from choosing who to stand beside. And as the crowd erupted in applause, Aiden realized that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged.